What happens when an attack designed to shake an entire nation ends up producing the exact opposite effect? That is the question many observers are asking after the recent attack on Diori Hamani International Airport in Niamey. For those responsible, the objective may have seemed clear: strike a symbolic target, create fear, raise doubts about security, and send a message that instability can still reach the very heart of Niger. But only days later, a different picture began to emerge. Instead of panic, authorities moved quickly to restore order. Instead of paralysis, security operations intensified. And instead of isolation, Niger found itself receiving stronger support from its regional partners and international allies. The timing of these developments has attracted growing attention across the Sahel. At a moment when the Alliance of Sahel states continues to strengthen cooperation between Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, many are beginning to wonder whether this attack may ultimately have reinforced the very alliance it sought to weaken. In today's analysis, we will examine the deeper significance of the Niamey Airport attack, the rapid response from Niger, the growing security cooperation surrounding AES, and the message that leaders such as Ibrahim Traore are sending to both supporters and adversaries. If you care about the future of the Sahel and the emergence of a more self-reliant Africa, be sure to subscribe and follow the channel for future discussions. To understand why this event matters so much, we must first examine the target itself. At first glance, Diori Hamani International Airport may appear to be just another transportation hub. In reality, it represents something much larger. It is one of the most important strategic locations in Niger. The airport serves as a gateway to the country, a symbol of national sovereignty, and a critical node connecting military, diplomatic, and economic activities. That reality raises an important question. Was the real target the airport itself? Or was it the confidence of the nation? The attack itself was serious, yet what followed may prove even more important. One of the first objectives of any high-profile attack is to create uncertainty. When a strategic location comes under assault, people immediately begin asking difficult questions. Is the situation under control? Can the authorities respond effectively? Could another attack happen soon? This is precisely why the reaction of Niger's security institutions attracted so much attention. Rather than allowing confusion to spread, authorities moved quickly to secure the area. Security forces established control around the airport, restricted access to sensitive zones, and launched operations aimed at identifying both the attackers and any networks that may have supported them. Just as important was the speed with which normal activity resumed. For many observers, the reopening and continued operation of key facilities sent a powerful signal. The message was simple. The state remained functional. The government remained in control. And the attack had failed to produce the level of disruption that its organizers may have hoped for. History shows that in conflicts involving insurgent or terrorist groups, perception often matters as much as physical damage. A successful attack can create fear far beyond the immediate target, but a rapid and organized response can limit that effect and restore public confidence. This is why many security analysts consider public trust to be one of the most important battlefields in modern conflict. Citizens need to believe that institutions can protect them. Investors need confidence that economic activity can continue. International partners need evidence that cooperation remains viable. In that sense, the response to the Niamey airport attack was about more than security operations. It was also about protecting national confidence. And perhaps most importantly, the events that followed suggested that Niger was not facing this challenge alone. As the situation stabilized, attention began shifting toward a broader development that was unfolding across the region. A development involving new partnerships, stronger military cooperation, and growing discussions about the future security architecture of the entire Sahel. As attention shifted beyond the immediate aftermath of the attack, another question began to dominate discussions across the Sahel. What happens when a regional alliance responds to a security challenge not with isolation, but with deeper cooperation? This is where the role of Russia enters the conversation. Over the past several years, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have increasingly diversified their international partnerships. Rather than relying exclusively on traditional security arrangements, these countries have explored new forms of military cooperation designed to strengthen their own capabilities. For supporters of this approach, the objective is straightforward. The goal is not dependence on a new partner. The goal is to expand options, acquire new capabilities, and increase strategic flexibility. Following the attack in Niamey, reports and discussions surrounding military cooperation once again drew public attention. Many observers pointed to growing coordination between AES members and their external partners, particularly in areas such as training, intelligence support, logistics, surveillance, and equipment modernization. The significance of these developments goes beyond military hardware. Modern security challenges require rapid communication, effective intelligence gathering, and the ability to respond quickly to emerging threats. In this environment, partnerships are often evaluated not by political rhetoric, but by practical outcomes on the ground. For Niger, the broader message is becoming increasingly clear. The country is attempting to build a security framework capable of responding to both conventional threats and asymmetric attacks. That process requires investment, training, coordination, and long-term planning. This is why many supporters of AES view recent developments as part of a larger transformation. The discussion is no longer simply about Russia. It is about whether African states can strengthen their security while maintaining control over their own strategic decisions. And that question leads directly to another important issue. If military cooperation is expanding and security structures are evolving, what role do political leaders play in shaping public confidence and regional unity during moments of crisis? To answer that question, we must examine the messages coming from Ibrahim Traore, Abdourahamane Tiani, and Assimi Goita. In moments of crisis, military strength matters, but leadership matters just as much. This is one reason why the reactions of key AES leaders have attracted significant attention following the attack on Niamey. Among them, Ibrahim Traore remains one of the most influential voices shaping public perception across the Sahel. For many supporters, Traore represents a broader movement focused on sovereignty, resilience, and African self-determination. Over the past several years, one of the central themes of his public message has been vigilance. According to this perspective, threats do not always arrive openly. Some emerge through insecurity, others emerge through political pressure, economic dependency, or attempts to weaken public confidence. As a result, maintaining national unity becomes just as important as maintaining military readiness. This message resonates strongly in the context of the Niamey Airport Attack. Rather than viewing the incident as an isolated event, many supporters of AES see it as part of a larger challenge facing the region. From this perspective, an attack against Niger is not simply a challenge for Niger alone. It is a test of the collective resilience of the entire alliance. At the same time, President Abdourahamane Tiani occupies a different but equally important role. If Traore often embodies the language of mobilization and awareness, Tiani is increasingly associated with operational stability and crisis management. The speed of Niger's response has reinforced the image of a government determined to demonstrate control under pressure. Assimi Goita brings another dimension to this leadership triangle. Having overseen years of security operations in Mali, Goita represents experience gained through prolonged confrontation with armed groups. His country's experience has become an important reference point for broader AES security cooperation. Together, these leaders contribute to a narrative that extends beyond military operations. The message is that AES is no longer simply a diplomatic arrangement. It is evolving into a security partnership built on the belief that regional challenges require regional responses. And that raises an intriguing possibility. What if the attackers achieved the exact opposite of what they intended? The more closely we examine the aftermath of the Niamey Airport Attack, the more a fascinating question begins to emerge. Did the attackers miscalculate the consequences of their own operation? Historically, attacks against symbolic targets are often designed to expose weakness, create fear, and undermine confidence in state institutions. The expectation is that governments will become defensive, alliances will become strained, and public uncertainty will increase. Yet the developments following the attack suggest a different possibility. Instead of weakening cooperation among AES members, the incident may have strengthened the argument for deeper coordination. Security planners across the region understand that modern threats rarely respect national borders. Armed groups move across vast territories, exploit remote areas, and adapt quickly to changing conditions. This reality has made intelligence sharing and coordinated responses increasingly important. As a result, many observers believe that events such as the Niamey attack could accelerate existing efforts to strengthen regional security mechanisms. This may include greater information sharing between member states, expanded coordination among security services, and increased protection of strategic infrastructure. Airports, military facilities, transportation corridors, energy installations, and communication networks have all become critical assets in modern security planning. The attack also reinforces another important lesson. Preparedness cannot begin after a crisis occurs. It must be built long before danger appears. This is one reason why discussions about training, surveillance capabilities, rapid response units, and infrastructure security are receiving renewed attention throughout the Sahel. Ironically, the operation that may have been intended to project strength could end up encouraging AES members to invest even more heavily in collective defense. If that happens, the long-term result could be very different from what the attackers originally expected. Instead of creating division, the attack may become a catalyst for stronger cooperation. And that brings us to one of the most debated aspects of this entire story. How are international observers, particularly in the West, interpreting the growing security partnerships emerging across the Sahel? As security cooperation within AES continues to expand, reactions from outside the region have been mixed. Some Western analysts argue that the growing presence of Russia in the Sahel could reshape the geopolitical balance of the region. Others express concern that replacing long-standing partnerships with new ones may introduce different risks and uncertainties. These concerns are often presented as warnings about influence, dependency, and long-term stability. From this perspective, critics argue that military cooperation alone cannot solve the complex challenges facing the Sahel. They point out that security, governance, economic development, and social cohesion must all work together if lasting stability is to be achieved. These arguments deserve consideration. However, there is also an important counterpoint. Supporters of AES frequently respond that sovereign nations have the right to choose their own partners and evaluate those partnerships based on practical results rather than external expectations. For many citizens across the region, the central question is not whether a partner comes from the East or the West. The central question is whether cooperation improves security, strengthens national institutions, and respects local decision-making. This debate highlights a broader issue facing many African countries. How can nations cooperate internationally without becoming overly dependent on any single external actor? The answer may lie in strategic balance. Partnerships can provide training, technology, investment, and security support. But ultimate responsibility for national development and national defense must remain in local hands. That lesson extends far beyond Niger. Countries across Africa continue to face questions about sovereignty, security, and development. The experience of AES is being watched closely because it represents an attempt to explore a different path. Whether that path succeeds or fails will ultimately depend not on rhetoric, but on measurable outcomes that improve the lives and security of ordinary citizens. As we reflect on the events surrounding the attack on Niamey's airport, one conclusion becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. This story is no longer just about a single attack. It is about how nations respond when confronted by uncertainty, pressure, and evolving security threats. The attack targeted one of Niger's most important strategic locations. It sought to create disruption, fear, and doubt. Yet the response that followed revealed something equally important. Institutions continued functioning. Security operations intensified. Regional cooperation remained active. And discussions about strengthening collective defense gained new momentum. The growing role of partnerships, including cooperation with Russia, has become part of a larger debate about sovereignty and strategic choice. At the same time, leaders such as Ibrahim Traore, Abdourahamane Tiani, and Assimi Goita continue to emphasize vigilance, resilience, and regional solidarity. Whether one agrees with every decision being made or not, the broader lesson remains relevant for countries across the continent. Security cannot be separated from sovereignty. Partnerships cannot replace national responsibility. And lasting stability requires both strong institutions and engaged citizens. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this moment is that challenges can sometimes produce unexpected outcomes. An attack intended to weaken confidence may instead encourage greater unity. A crisis designed to expose vulnerability may accelerate efforts to build resilience. As Africa continues navigating a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape, the questions raised by the Niamey attack will remain important. The future of Pan-African cooperation. The evolution of Burkina Faso under Captain Ibrahim Traore. The role of Ibrahim Traore in advancing Pan-Africanism. The development of Africa, new partnerships, and the contribution of the African Union will all remain central to discussions about the continent's future. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe to the channel and join us for future discussions on the forces shaping Africa's next chapter. The explosions did not shock the Sahel. What shocked the region was how fast everything happened. Within hours of coordinated attacks in northern Mali, warplanes linked to the alliance of Sahel states moved into action. Targets were identified. Airspace was coordinated. Intelligence was shared. And for the first time, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger responded not like three separate governments, but like one military structure operating across borders. That is the real story. For years, the Sahel was known for fragmented responses, delayed operations, and international missions that often struggled to react quickly enough to fast-moving insurgent groups. Armed factions learned how to exploit borders, bureaucracy, and hesitation. They survived by moving faster than governments could coordinate. But now something appears to be changing. The Alliance of Sahel States, also known as AES, is beginning to act with a level of coordination that many observers did not expect to see this quickly. And whether people support or oppose these governments, one fact is becoming difficult to ignore. The military landscape of the Sahel may be entering an entirely new phase. This is no longer only about isolated counter-terrorism operations. It is about the possible birth of a regional military system built and controlled inside Africa itself. And that possibility is making many actors nervous. Because if AES can sustain this level of coordination, the balance of security power in West Africa could slowly begin to shift away from older international models and toward a new regional structure driven directly by Sahel states themselves. For the first time in many years, some Africans are asking a different question, not whether outside powers will stabilize the Sahel, but whether the Sahel is preparing to stabilize itself. If you follow Africa's changing future, subscribe, because what is happening now may reshape the continent for decades. At the beginning, many observers viewed the alliance of Sahel states as mostly political. A declaration, a message of resistance, a symbolic partnership between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, after growing tensions with ECOWAS, France, and several Western security structures. But recent events suggest that AES is becoming something very different. What the region is now witnessing is not simply diplomatic coordination. It is the early formation of a functioning military framework capable of acting across borders with shared objectives and synchronized timing. That distinction matters enormously. For decades, security operations in the Sahel were usually handled country by country. Even when neighboring states faced the same insurgent threats, military responses often remained fragmented. Intelligence moved slowly. Operations required separate approvals. Coordination was limited. Armed groups learned how to exploit those gaps. AES appears to be trying to eliminate them. The recent air operations demonstrated several things at once. Intelligence was shared quickly. Airspace coordination was possible between multiple governments. Decisions were made rapidly, and military pressure was applied almost simultaneously. That is no longer symbolic cooperation. That is operational coordination. And once a regional alliance reaches that stage, the strategic environment begins to change. Because enemies are no longer calculating the response of a single nation. They are calculating the possible response of an entire regional bloc acting together. That creates a very different kind of pressure. For armed groups operating across the Sahel, borders once created breathing room. Fighters could relocate. Networks could reorganize. Delays between governments created time. But if AES continues functioning this way, those gaps may begin to shrink. And that may be the most important military development the Sahel has seen in years. The most dangerous advantage in modern conflict is not always firepower. Sometimes it is speed. And that may be exactly what the alliance of Sahel states is trying to build. The recent military response inside Mali was not remarkable only because airstrikes happened. Airstrikes happen in many conflicts around the world. What made this situation different was the timeline. Operations reportedly began within hours after coordinated attacks in the north. That level of reaction does not happen through improvisation. It suggests that communication systems were already active. Intelligence channels were already functioning. Military leadership already understood who would respond, how they would respond, and how quickly decisions could be approved. That changes everything. For years, one of the biggest weaknesses in Sahel security operations was delay. Information often moved through multiple bureaucratic layers before action was taken. By the time responses were organized, armed groups had already relocated or disappeared into border regions. AES appears to be attempting a completely different model. Instead of waiting for slow international coordination, decisions are being pushed closer to the battlefield itself. And in asymmetric warfare, that can become a massive strategic advantage. Because insurgent groups survive through mobility, They rely on time. Time to escape. Time to reorganize. Time to exploit confusion between neighboring states. But when three governments coordinate rapidly, those windows begin to close. This is why the speed of the response matters more than the number of aircraft involved. It signals the existence of a structure capable of immediate action. And for many Africans watching the Sahel, this feels historically important. For the first time in a long time, regional security decisions appear to be happening inside the region itself, shaped by governments facing the threat directly, instead of distant international systems operating far from the battlefield. The growing coordination inside the alliance of Sahel states is not only changing military calculations, it is also creating anxiety among armed groups, regional rivals, and even some international powers watching the region closely. Because the real fear is not one successful operation. The real fear is what happens if this becomes normal. For years, many insurgent groups survived by exploiting geography. Borders across the Sahel were often difficult to control. Fighters could move between remote regions, reorganize networks, and avoid concentrated military pressure by crossing from one national territory into another. That environment created flexibility. But a coordinated AES changes that equation. If Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger begin operating as a synchronized security space, movement becomes more dangerous for armed factions. Pressure can emerge from multiple directions at the same time. Escape routes become less predictable. Delays become shorter, and uncertainty begins to grow for groups that once relied on fragmented government responses. That is why reactions from Tuareg separatist groups were immediate and highly focused on the involvement of Burkina Faso and Niger, because their participation changes the battlefield itself. But concern is not limited to insurgent groups alone. International observers are also paying close attention because AES represents something larger than counterterrorism operations. It represents the possibility of a regional military structure developing outside many traditional Western-led security frameworks. And that possibility carries geopolitical consequences. If AES succeeds in sustaining rapid coordination, some countries may begin asking difficult questions about the future role of older international security models in Africa. That is why this moment matters beyond Mali. It touches the broader balance of influence inside West Africa itself. The concern now is not whether AES can launch one operation. The concern is whether it is building a military system capable of repeating this kind of response again and again under growing pressure. No figure represents the new political mood inside the Sahel more strongly than Captain Ibrahim Traore. To many supporters across Africa, he symbolizes a generation that no longer wants the continent's security future designed somewhere else. His speeches, public image, and political messaging consistently focus on sovereignty, self-reliance, and the idea that African nations must develop the ability to defend themselves without permanent dependence on outside powers. That message connects deeply inside the Sahel. Because for many people in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, years of international military involvement did not bring the level of stability they had hoped for. Violence expanded, armed groups adapted, entire communities continued to live under insecurity. As frustration grew, leaders like Ibrahim Traore began presenting a different vision, a vision where African states cooperate directly with one another, share intelligence, coordinate military action, and respond to threats using structures controlled inside the region itself. That is one reason the alliance of Sahel states carries emotional weight far beyond military strategy. To supporters, AES is not simply a security pact. It represents dignity, independence, and the belief that African nations should have the power to make urgent security decisions without waiting for approval from distant capitals. This is also why Pan-Africanism has become closely connected to the image of AES. Many young Africans now see the alliance as proof that regional cooperation can move beyond speeches and become operational reality. But there is also an important counter-argument. Symbols alone cannot stabilize a region. Strong speeches cannot replace logistics, training, intelligence networks, or economic resilience. If security conditions fail to improve over time, public enthusiasm could face serious pressure. And that may become the greatest challenge facing Ibrahim Traore and the broader AES project. Inspiration can unite people, but only long-term results can transform a powerful symbol into lasting history. The rise of the alliance of Sahel states has triggered mixed reactions far beyond West Africa. Supporters describe AES as a necessary step toward African security independence. Critics, especially in parts of the Western political and media landscape, see something far more concerning. One major criticism focuses on military rule. Western governments and international organizations have repeatedly warned that prolonged military leadership could weaken democratic institutions inside Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Others fear that intensified regional military operations could increase instability or create new humanitarian risks if conflicts continue expanding across borders. There is also a strategic concern beneath the political language. For decades, security policy in the Sahel involved heavy international influence through military partnerships, intelligence support, and foreign deployments. But AES is attempting to build a regional security system that answers primarily to Sahel governments themselves. And that shift could gradually reduce outside influence in one of Africa's most strategically important regions. However, many people inside the Sahel present a different argument. They point out that despite years of international operations, insecurity continued spreading across large parts of the region. Armed groups became more organized, civilian displacement increased, and public frustration slowly grew. For many citizens, AES did not emerge because people rejected cooperation with the outside world. It emerged because confidence in older security models had weakened. That distinction is important. This is not simply a military disagreement between Africa and the West. It is also a debate about who should control security decisions inside African territories. And there may be lessons here for other African nations. The first lesson is that regional cooperation matters. Armed groups move across borders, so intelligence and military coordination may also need to cross borders. The second lesson is that speed matters as much as weapons. Delayed decisions can become strategic weaknesses. But there is also a final lesson. Sovereignty cannot survive on emotion alone. Any nation seeking true security independence must still build strong institutions, logistics, communication systems, and long-term economic stability. Whether the alliance of Sahel states succeeds or fails will not be decided by one operation. History is shaped by repetition. Right now, AES has demonstrated something important. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have shown they can coordinate military action quickly, share operational responsibilities, and respond to threats with a level of synchronization many observers did not expect this soon. That alone is already changing perceptions across the Sahel. Because once a regional military structure proves it can function in real time, expectations begin to rise. Governments study it, armed groups adapt to it, foreign powers begin recalculating their influence in West Africa. But the real test is only beginning. Maintaining rapid coordination under long-term pressure is far harder than achieving it once. Over time, every alliance faces strain. Logistics become difficult, economic pressure grows, political priorities can slowly diverge. That is where military alliances either evolve into stable systems or begin to fracture. Still, many Africans are watching this moment with cautious optimism. For decades, African security discussions often centered around dependency and foreign intervention. AES is trying to present another vision, a vision where regional states cooperate directly, build military capability together, and define security priorities from inside Africa itself. Whether that vision succeeds remains uncertain, but its symbolic importance is already undeniable. Across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, supporters increasingly connect this moment to Pan-African hopes for a more independent future. Many believe Africa New must eventually include African control over African security decisions. That is why figures like Captain Ibrahim Traore have become closely linked to this movement. The African Union and neighboring states are watching carefully because the outcome may influence future regional alliances across the continent. If Pan-Africanism can move from speeches into real coordination, Ibrahim Traore and the AES Alliance may reshape how the world sees African power in the Sahel. If you believe Africa is entering a new chapter, subscribe and stay with us because the story of the Sahel is only beginning. The sound of gunfire once again echoed across Niger's capital before sunrise. Residents living near Diori Hamani International Airport woke up to explosions, sustained gunfire, and the terrifying realization that one of the country's most strategic locations had once again come under attack. For nearly 2 hours, security forces and armed attackers exchanged fire around the airport area, turning what should have been an ordinary morning into another reminder that the struggle for stability in the Sahel is far from over. According to security reports, Nigerian forces quickly responded to the assault and eventually pushed the attackers back before they could penetrate deeper into the airport's defenses. Several militants were reportedly killed, while authorities maintained control of the facility. Yet, for many observers, the most important questions began only after the shooting stopped. Why was the same strategic airport targeted again, only months after a major attack earlier this year? How were the attackers able to organize such an operation? And why did reports emerging from the subsequent security sweep suggest that investigators may have uncovered something far more troubling than a simple terrorist assault? As security forces expanded their search operations across Niamey, reports began circulating about arrests, hidden weapons, and possible support networks operating within the city itself. While some claims remain unverified, they have reignited a debate that has been growing across the alliance of Sahel states for months. Was this merely another terrorist attack? Or could it be evidence of a deeper campaign designed to destabilize Niger and its allies from within? In today's analysis, we will examine what happened at Niamey's airport, why this location continues to be a target, and whether recent events may be connected to the warning that Captain Ibrahim Traore once described as a coming black winter. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community following Africa's rapidly changing future. Diori Hamani International Airport is not just another airport on the African continent. For Niger, it represents a gateway to the world, a critical transportation hub, and one of the most important strategic assets in the country's security architecture. That reality explains why every attack directed at this location attracts attention far beyond the borders of Niger itself. When reports emerged that armed militants had once again targeted the airport area, many observers immediately remembered the major assault that occurred only a few months earlier. At that time, attackers managed to strike facilities connected to both civilian and military operations. The incident exposed vulnerabilities that authorities believed had already been addressed through stronger surveillance systems, expanded security perimeters, and increased military deployments around the capital. This raises an important question. If security measures were strengthened after the previous attack, why would militants return to the exact same location? One explanation is that the airport's symbolic value may be just as important as its military value. An attack against a remote outpost might go unnoticed by much of the world. An attack near the main airport of a national capital immediately generates headlines, creates uncertainty among citizens, and attracts international attention. In modern conflicts, perception can sometimes be as powerful as physical damage. The airport also occupies a special place within the broader security framework of the Alliance of Sahel states, as Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso continue expanding cooperation against armed groups. Strategic facilities such as Diori Hamani become symbols of the alliance's ability to maintain order and defend national sovereignty. For that reason, the recent assault may have carried a message beyond the immediate objective of causing casualties or disruption. It may have been intended to challenge public confidence and demonstrate that even heavily protected locations remain vulnerable. Whether successful or not, the repeated targeting of the same strategic facility suggests that the struggle unfolding across the Sahel is increasingly focused on symbols of state authority and regional cooperation rather than isolated military positions alone. As the gunfire faded and security forces secured the airport perimeter, attention quickly shifted toward what investigators might uncover during the operations that followed. In many security crises, the attack itself is only the beginning of the story. What authorities discover afterward often reveals whether the incident was an isolated act or part of a much larger network. Following the assault in Niamey, security personnel reportedly expanded search and intelligence operations across multiple areas of the capital. Reports emerged that several suspects had been detained for questioning, while security patrols intensified around strategic locations. These developments immediately fueled speculation about how the attackers were able to prepare and execute such an operation so close to one of the country's most protected facilities. Particularly controversial were reports circulating through various media and social networks claiming that investigators had discovered weapons caches and arrested individuals suspected of providing logistical support. Among the most widely discussed allegations were claims involving a French citizen and the discovery of military equipment hidden within an urban residence. At the time of this analysis, many of these claims remain disputed or unverified, making caution essential when evaluating them. However, even without confirming every allegation, the broader concern remains highly relevant. Modern insurgent operations rarely depend solely on the individuals who carry out an attack. Successful assaults often require transportation, communications, safe houses, financial assistance, intelligence gathering, IP, and local support networks. These structures are typically far less visible than armed fighters themselves. This is why many citizens across Niger are asking a different question today. The concern is no longer limited to who pulled the trigger near the airport. Instead, attention is increasingly focused on whether hidden support systems may exist within urban areas, allowing violent groups to operate closer to major population centers. If such networks are present, the challenge facing Niger extends beyond military operations. It becomes a question of intelligence, community vigilance, and the ability of state institutions to identify threats before they reach strategic targets. For many observers, that possibility is far more alarming than the attack itself. Long before the latest attack in Niamey, Captain Ibrahim Traore repeatedly warned that the struggle facing the countries of the Sahel was evolving. According to his view, the conflict was never simply about armed men moving through remote deserts or attacking isolated military positions. He argued that as governments became more effective in confronting insurgent groups on the battlefield, those groups and their supporters would adapt by seeking new methods of pressure. This idea is often associated with what supporters describe as a coming black winter. Rather than referring to a single military campaign, the concept suggests a period of intensified instability characterized by sabotage, psychological pressure, economic disruption, and attempts to weaken public confidence in national institutions. From this perspective, attacks on strategic infrastructure carry a significance far beyond their immediate tactical impact. A strike against an airport, a military base, or a government facility can create fear among citizens, generate international headlines, and raise doubts about whether authorities truly control the situation. The objective may be less about occupying territory and more about shaping perceptions. Events in Niger have therefore attracted attention across the alliance of Sahel states. Supporters of Traore's analysis point out that the recent attack occurred not in a distant border region, but near the heart of the capital itself. They argue that this reflects a broader shift from conventional insurgent tactics toward operations designed to create insecurity within major urban centers. Similar concerns have been expressed in Mali and Burkina Faso, where authorities frequently emphasize the importance of intelligence gathering, community vigilance, and the identification of support networks that may operate behind the scenes, whether one agrees entirely with the Black Winter interpretation or not. The underlying warning remains relevant. The greatest threat may not always come from visible fighters on the battlefield. It may emerge through hidden structures that finance, organize, support, and enable acts of violence from within society itself. That possibility helps explain why the events in Niamey are being discussed not merely as a security incident, but as part of a much larger regional struggle. The response of the Alliance of Sahel states to recent security threats reveals how dramatically the region's strategy has evolved over the past several years. Rather than viewing attacks as isolated incidents affecting individual countries, the leaders of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso increasingly present them as shared challenges requiring coordinated solutions. For Niger's leader, General Abdourahamane Tiani, the attack near Niamey's airport represents more than a local security breach. It is a direct challenge to national stability and public confidence. Maintaining control over strategic infrastructure has become essential, not only for security purposes, but also for demonstrating that the state remains capable of protecting its citizens and institutions. In Mali, General Assimi Goita has consistently emphasized the importance of African-led security solutions. His government has repeatedly argued that long-term stability cannot depend entirely on external assistance. Instead, regional states must strengthen their own military capabilities, intelligence systems, and operational coordination. Captain Ibrahim Traore has advanced a similar message in Burkina Faso. He frequently argues that sovereignty means more than political independence. In his view, true sovereignty includes the ability to defend borders, secure strategic assets, and prevent foreign or domestic actors from undermining national stability. These shared perspectives have contributed to the growing cooperation within the Alliance of Sahel states. Intelligence sharing has become increasingly important as authorities seek to identify recruitment networks, financial channels, and logistical structures that may support violent groups across national borders. Military cooperation has also expanded, reflecting a recognition that many security threats move freely throughout the wider Sahel region. The attack in Niamey may therefore strengthen existing efforts rather than weaken them. Instead of encouraging division, such incidents can reinforce the belief among AES leaders that closer coordination is necessary. Whether these policies ultimately succeed remains to be seen. But one message appears clear. The governments of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso increasingly view security as a collective responsibility, and they appear determined to confront emerging threats through deeper regional cooperation rather than isolated national responses. The events in Niamey have also reignited a broader debate about the future direction of the Sahel and the role of external powers in the region. For years, governments in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso maintained close security partnerships with Western nations. Yet despite extensive military cooperation, large areas of the region continued to experience persistent instability and violence. Critics in Western countries often express concern about the political trajectory of the Alliance of Sahel states. They question the long-term sustainability of military-led governments and argue that democratic institutions remain essential for lasting stability. Others worry that changing security partnerships could create new uncertainties in an already fragile region. These concerns deserve consideration. However, supporters of the AES approach offer a different perspective. They argue that the primary responsibility of any government is to provide security for its population. From their viewpoint, years of international assistance failed to eliminate the threats facing the region, forcing Sahelian states to reconsider existing strategies and seek alternative partnerships. This disagreement reflects a larger debate about sovereignty. Should African countries be free to choose their own security partners and development paths? Even when those choices differ from Western preferences, many leaders within AES answer that question with a clear yes. At the same time, the situation should not be reduced to a simple struggle between Africa and the West. The real challenge remains the protection of citizens, the defeat of violent groups, and the creation of conditions that allow economic growth and political stability to flourish. The attack in Niamey, therefore, highlights more than a security crisis. It exposes competing visions for the future of the Sahel. One side emphasizes continuity with established international partnerships. The other argues for a new approach centered on greater self-reliance, regional cooperation, and stronger national control over security affairs. The outcome of that debate may influence the region for many years to come. The attack near Niamey's airport may eventually be remembered for more than the gunfire, the casualties, or the arrests that followed. It may become a symbol of a larger struggle unfolding across the Sahel, a struggle that touches sovereignty, security, national identity, and the future direction of an entire region. What happened in Niger demonstrates that modern conflicts are no longer fought only on distant battlefields. They are increasingly fought through information networks, hidden support structures, economic pressure, and attempts to influence public confidence. A nation can secure its borders and still face threats that emerge from within its own cities. That reality explains why leaders across the Sahel continue emphasizing vigilance, intelligence, and national unity as essential components of security. For the countries of the Alliance of Sahel states, the challenge extends beyond defeating armed groups. The broader objective is to build institutions capable of protecting infrastructure, defending sovereignty, and maintaining public trust during uncertainty. The debate surrounding the recent events in Niamey will continue. Some observers will focus on terrorism. Others will focus on geopolitics. Still others will examine governance and regional cooperation. Yet all these discussions point toward the same issue. Stability cannot exist without security, and security cannot endure without public support. As Africa enters a new chapter, many citizens are asking what sovereignty should look like. The ideas of Pan-African cooperation, Pan-Africanism, and stronger regional partnerships continue shaping that conversation. From Burkina Faso to Niger and Mali, leaders such as Captain Ibrahim Traore have become central figures in debates about the future of the continent, whether through the African Union, regional alliances, or what many describe as an Africa New Vision, the search for stability remains a defining challenge. If you found value in this analysis, share your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever wondered why a valley once used by extremist groups is now becoming one of the places they fear the most? Recently, Burkina Faso's BIR-23 launched a decisive operation against a JNIM position in Bangasso, a locality within the Saourou Valley. After several days of surveillance and intelligence gathering, the unit moved into action. When the operation ended, the militant base had been destroyed, and valuable equipment had been seized. At first glance, this may appear to be another successful counterterrorism mission. However, the events in Bangasso may represent something much larger. They reflect changing military tactics in Burkina Faso, the growing influence of African-led security strategies, and a broader effort by the Alliance of Sahel states to strengthen regional self-reliance. If you are interested in understanding the forces reshaping West Africa today, be sure to follow the channel and stay with us until the end. To understand the importance of this operation, we must first look at the Saourou Valley itself. For years, the region has held strategic value because of its location and its role as a movement corridor for armed groups. Control of this area can influence security across surrounding communities. What makes the Bangasso operation stand out is not only the outcome, but also the preparation behind it. BIR-23 reportedly spent days monitoring the target, gathering information, and studying enemy activity before launching its assault. This detail reveals an important lesson. Modern military success is often built on patience, intelligence, and careful planning. In Bangasso, information became a weapon, and preparation laid the foundation for victory. The destruction of the Bangasso base was more than a tactical success. It represented a direct challenge to JNIM's ability to operate freely inside the Saourou Valley. According to reports from the operation, BIR-23 not only eliminated the position, but also recovered weapons, satellite communication equipment, and mobility assets used by the militants. Each of these items plays an important role in sustaining insurgent activity. Weapons provide combat capability. Communication devices allow coordination across remote areas. Vehicles make it possible to move fighters, supplies, and information quickly across difficult terrain. When a group loses these resources, the impact goes far beyond a single battlefield encounter. Replacing trained fighters may be difficult, but rebuilding a disrupted support network can be even harder. Logistics, communications, and mobility are the foundations that allow insurgent organizations to survive over long periods. This is why the Bangasso operation carries strategic significance. The loss of a base means the loss of a safe location for planning, regrouping, and storing resources. It forces militants to spend time and energy rebuilding instead of expanding their activities. The psychological effect is equally important. Areas once viewed as secure can suddenly become vulnerable when intelligence-driven operations begin targeting hidden positions. For JNIM, that creates uncertainty. Fighters can no longer assume that remote locations automatically provide protection. For local communities, the message is very different. Operations like this demonstrate that state security forces are willing and able to pursue threats beyond major towns and into areas that have long experienced instability. The battle in Bangasso was therefore not only about what was destroyed, it was about changing the balance of confidence. JNIM lost a place it depended on, while Burkina Faso gained another example of its growing ability to challenge extremist networks in one of the most contested parts of the country. What makes BIR-23 stand out is not simply its ability to win battles. Many military units can achieve success under favorable conditions. What separates elite formations from ordinary ones is their ability to produce results consistently in difficult environments. The Bangasso operation highlights several characteristics that have helped BIR-23 build a growing reputation across Burkina Faso. First is discipline. Rather than rushing toward a target, The unit appears to prioritize observation, preparation, and timing. This reduces unnecessary risks and increases the chances of success once an operation begins. Second is the emphasis on intelligence. Modern conflicts are often won by those who understand the battlefield better than their opponents. Knowing where a group is located, how it communicates, when it moves, and where it stores equipment can be more valuable than overwhelming firepower. BIR-23 has increasingly demonstrated the importance of information-driven operations. Third is initiative. In many conflicts, security forces spend most of their time reacting to attacks. BIR-23 represents a different approach. Instead of waiting for threats to emerge, it seeks to identify and disrupt them before they can act. This shift from reaction to prevention can significantly change the security environment over time. These qualities have helped transform the unit into more than a military formation. For many citizens, it has become a symbol of determination and national resilience. Each successful mission reinforces the belief that difficult areas can be stabilized and that extremist groups are not invincible. Perhaps the most important lesson is that effective military power is not measured only by weapons or numbers. It is measured by preparation, adaptability, and the ability to make sound decisions under pressure. In that sense, BIR-23 represents a broader transformation taking place within Burkina Faso's security strategy. To understand why operations such as Bangasso continue to attract attention across West Africa, it is important to look beyond the battlefield and examine the broader security philosophy that has emerged under Ibrahim Traore's leadership. One of the most significant shifts has been the move away from a purely defensive posture. For many years, security forces in the region were often forced to respond after attacks had already occurred. Armed groups would strike villages, disrupt transportation routes, or target military positions before disappearing into difficult terrain. This created a cycle in which the initiative frequently remained with the insurgents. The approach increasingly associated with Burkina Faso today seeks to reverse that dynamic. Rather than waiting for threats to appear, security forces aim to identify hostile networks, monitor their movements, and disrupt their operations before attacks can be launched. The Bangasso operation reflects this principle. Days of surveillance were followed by a carefully timed intervention designed to remove a threat before it could strengthen its position. This shift also reflects a broader emphasis on regaining control of territory. Security is not measured only by the absence of attacks. It is also measured by whether citizens can travel safely, cultivate farmland, conduct business, and maintain normal daily life. Every area restored to greater stability represents progress toward that objective. Equally important is the psychological dimension. Successful operations help strengthen public confidence in state institutions. When communities repeatedly witness security forces taking initiative and producing results, trust can begin to replace fear. That confidence becomes an important asset in its own right, because local populations are often essential sources of information and cooperation. For this reason, the significance of Bangasso extends beyond the immediate outcome. The operation serves as an example of how a new security mindset is being translated into action on the ground, combining intelligence, preparation, and persistence in pursuit of longer-term stability. While Ibrahim Traore is often the most visible figure associated with Burkina Faso's security transformation, the developments taking place today extend beyond any single leader. They are increasingly connected to the broader vision emerging within the Alliance of Sahel states, commonly known as AES. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger face many of the same challenges. Armed groups move across borders, exploit remote terrain, and take advantage of gaps in regional coordination. Because these threats do not stop at national boundaries, the response cannot remain limited to individual countries acting alone. This reality has encouraged deeper cooperation among AES members. Intelligence sharing, military coordination, training initiatives, and joint security planning have become important components of the alliance's strategy. The objective is not simply to react to isolated incidents, but to create a more integrated approach to regional security. The Bangasso operation can be viewed through this wider lens. While the action itself occurred within Burkina Faso, its significance reaches beyond a single location. Every successful operation that weakens extremist networks contributes to the overall security environment of neighboring countries as well. For supporters of the AES project, this represents an important shift. Instead of relying primarily on external actors to define security priorities, member states are increasingly seeking to build solutions based on their own assessment of local realities. Whether one fully agrees with every aspect of this approach or not, it reflects a growing determination to develop regional capabilities from within. In that sense, Bangasso is more than a battlefield success. It is another example of how Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting to transform shared security challenges into opportunities for deeper cooperation and greater self-reliance across the Sahel region. As Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger pursue a more independent security strategy, their approach continues to generate debate beyond the region. Some Western governments, analysts, and organizations have expressed concerns about governance, military influence in politics, and the long-term implications of the changes taking place across the Sahel. Critics argue that security operations alone cannot solve every challenge facing the region. They point to issues such as economic development, political reform, and human rights as factors that must also be addressed. These concerns remain part of the broader international discussion surrounding the future of the Sahel. At the same time, many citizens within the region view the situation through a different lens. For communities that have endured years of violence, displacement, and insecurity, the immediate question is often whether daily life is becoming safer. From this perspective, successful operations against armed groups carry significant weight because they directly affect the ability of families to work, travel, and live without fear. The reality is that both security and long-term development matter. Stability creates conditions for progress, while lasting progress helps reinforce stability. The challenge for Burkina Faso and its partners is to strengthen both at the same time. The operation in Bangasso illustrates why this debate continues. Supporters see evidence of growing capability and determination. Critics urge caution and broader reforms. Between these perspectives lies an important truth. Nations are ultimately judged not only by promises or criticism, but by the conditions experienced by their people on the ground. The operation in Bangasso will likely be remembered for more than the destruction of a single militant base. It represents a broader story unfolding across the Sahel, one that combines military adaptation, regional cooperation, and a growing belief in self-reliance. For Burkina Faso, the mission demonstrated the effectiveness of intelligence-driven operations. BIR-23 showed that patience, preparation, and precise execution can produce meaningful results against determined adversaries. The success also reinforced the unit's growing reputation as one of the most capable military formations in the region. At a deeper level, the operation reflected the security philosophy that has become increasingly associated with Ibrahim Traore's leadership. The emphasis on initiative rather than reaction, on reclaiming territory rather than merely defending it, and on strengthening local capabilities rather than relying exclusively on external solutions continues to shape the country's approach. The significance extends beyond Burkina Faso. Through the alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting to create a framework in which neighboring countries cooperate more closely to confront common threats. Whether this model ultimately achieves all of its goals remains to be seen, but its influence on regional discussions is already clear. Perhaps the most important lesson from Bangasso is that lasting change often begins with a series of determined actions. A single operation cannot solve every challenge facing the Sahel, yet each successful step can help create momentum, restore confidence, and open new possibilities for the future. For many supporters of Pan-African ideals, the events in Burkina Faso symbolize something larger than military success. They reflect an Africa new vision of responsibility, capability, and self-determination. Discussions about Pan-Africanism, the African Union, Captain Ibrahim Traore, and Ibrahim Traore himself continue to generate strong opinions, but they also highlight a growing conversation about how African nations can shape their own future. As Burkina Faso moves forward, many across the continent will be watching closely. If you found this analysis valuable, share your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel for more insights into the changing landscape of Africa and the Sahel. What happens when fighter jets are striking targets across Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni, while, at the very same moment, a national leader chooses to travel through one of the most dangerous roads in the Sahel? That question is now being asked across West Africa after images emerged of Captain Ibrahim Traore traveling alongside troops on the Dédougou-Solenzo route, an area that has faced years of security threats, roadside explosives, and terrorist activity. At the same time, the Malian armed forces have intensified military operations across several strategic regions. Reports from the battlefield indicate precision strikes against militant positions, logistics hubs, weapon storage sites, and networks believed to support terrorist activities, from Gao in the east to Kidal in the north, from Kayes in the west to Buguni in the south. Mali appears determined to increase pressure on armed groups operating across the country. But this story is bigger than military operations alone. It is about leadership under pressure. It is about the changing security landscape of the Sahel. And it is about a growing message coming from the countries of the Alliance of Sahel states that they intend to confront security threats on their own terms. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss important developments shaping the future of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and the wider Sahel region. The first thing that stands out is the scale of Mali's recent operations. Instead of focusing on a single area, military pressure has reportedly been applied across multiple regions simultaneously. In Gao, security forces targeted locations believed to be linked to armed networks. In Kidal, continued surveillance and strike operations aimed to limit the movement of hostile elements. In Kayes, military attention focused on locations suspected of supporting retreat and resupply activities. Meanwhile, in Buguni, security forces disrupted an alleged attempt to place explosive devices along an important transportation corridor. Taken together, these operations reveal something important. Mali is no longer presenting these actions as isolated responses to attacks. The pattern suggests a broader strategy aimed at weakening the infrastructure that allows armed groups to operate, move, communicate, and sustain themselves across vast areas of territory. To understand why Mali has concentrated military pressure on Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni, it is necessary to look beyond the headlines and examine the strategic value of these locations. Gao has long been one of the most important cities in northern Mali. Positioned along major transportation routes, it serves as a gateway connecting different parts of the country. Control of Gao influences the movement of people, supplies, and security forces. For armed groups, access to areas around Gao can provide opportunities to move resources and maintain operational flexibility. For the state, maintaining control of Gao is essential for preserving national cohesion and projecting authority into remote regions. Kidal carries a different but equally significant importance. For years, the region has been associated with insurgent activity, armed movements, and difficult terrain that complicates security operations. Because of its location and history, Kidal has often been viewed as a symbolic and strategic center in the struggle for stability in northern Mali. Any effort to limit militant freedom of movement in this region carries both military and political significance. Further west lies Kayes, a region frequently described as an economic lifeline. Important commercial routes pass through the area, linking Mali with neighboring countries and international markets. Disruptions in Kayes can affect transportation, trade, fuel supplies, and economic activity far beyond the region itself. This makes security in Kayes a national concern rather than a purely local issue. In the south, Buguni occupies a key position along transportation corridors that support both civilian and military movement. Protecting these routes is critical because armed groups often target roads and infrastructure to create fear, slow economic activity, and undermine confidence in government authority. Viewed together, these four locations form a network of strategic points. By focusing attention on them simultaneously, Mali appears to be targeting not just individual threats, but the geographic foundations that allow long-term insurgent activity to survive. Modern counterterrorism campaigns are often described in terms of battles, airstrikes, and territorial gains, yet military planners understand a different reality. The true strength of an armed group is rarely measured only by the number of fighters it possesses. It is measured by its ability to sustain operations over time. This is why logistics and financing have become some of the most important battlegrounds in the Sahel. A militant organization can recruit fighters, but without fuel, transportation, communications equipment, weapons, safe houses, and reliable supply routes, its ability to conduct large-scale operations gradually weakens. Every movement across a vast region such as the Sahel requires resources. Every attack requires planning, transportation, intelligence, and supplies. For this reason, recent military actions in Mali appear designed to target more than individual combatants. The focus increasingly includes the systems that allow those combatants to survive and operate. Storage facilities, transportation networks, supply routes, and sources of funding have become critical targets. Military analysts often compare insurgent logistics to the bloodstream of a living organism. As long as resources continue to flow, the organization can adapt and recover from losses. However, when those flows are disrupted, operational effectiveness begins to decline. Fighters may struggle to move between regions. Communication becomes more difficult. Recruitment efforts slow down. Local influence weakens. This strategy is particularly relevant in the Sahel, where distance plays a major role in military operations. Armed groups frequently rely on mobility and dispersed networks rather than large conventional bases. Limiting their freedom of movement can therefore create significant pressure, even without major ground battles. From this perspective, the operations taking place across Mali represent more than a series of tactical victories. They reflect an effort to challenge the foundations that sustain long-term insurgent activity. The objective is not only to win individual engagements, but also to reduce the ability of hostile networks to regenerate, reorganize, and project influence across the regions. While military operations often dominate headlines, the image that captured attention across the Sahel was not a fighter jet, a drone, or a battlefield report. It was the sight of Captain Ibrahim Traore traveling alongside soldiers on the Dédougou-Solenzo route. For many observers, this was far more than a routine visit. The road itself carries significant symbolic weight. For years, areas surrounding this corridor have faced security threats, including armed attacks and roadside explosive devices. Traveling through such an environment is not simply a matter of protocol. It sends a message that leadership is willing to be physically present in regions where security challenges remain real. This is one reason the event resonated so strongly among supporters across Burkina Faso and neighboring countries. In times of conflict, symbolism matters. Soldiers on the front line often measure leadership not only by speeches, but also by visible actions. A leader who appears in difficult environments can strengthen morale and reinforce the belief that sacrifices made by security forces are recognized at the highest levels. The significance of the visit becomes even greater when viewed alongside the military operations taking place in Mali. As pressure increased on armed groups across Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni, Traore's presence on a forward route created the impression of a broader regional determination to confront insecurity. Supporters interpreted the journey as evidence of shared risk. They saw a leader willing to stand closer to the realities faced by ordinary soldiers rather than remaining distant from events on the ground. At the same time, the visit carried a message for local communities living in conflict-affected areas. Beyond military objectives, stability ultimately depends on public confidence. When residents witness state institutions maintaining a presence in challenging regions, it can help reinforce the perception that those areas have not been abandoned. For this reason, the journey to Solenzo became more than a security visit. It evolved into a symbol of resilience, responsibility, and the determination to maintain a visible commitment to the struggle for stability across the Sahel. To fully understand the significance of Ibrahim Traore's appearance on the front line, it is important to view it within the broader context of the Alliance of Sahel States, commonly known as AES. The alliance brings together Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, three countries facing similar security challenges and determined to strengthen regional cooperation. While each nation has its own priorities and internal dynamics, they share a common objective: improving security and reducing the influence of armed groups operating across borders. Over the past several years, leaders within the alliance have increasingly emphasized the importance of self-reliance. The argument is straightforward. Lasting security cannot depend entirely on outside actors. National institutions, local armed forces, and regional partnerships must play a leading role in protecting territory and populations. This philosophy is closely associated with Ibrahim Traore's public message. Throughout his leadership, he has frequently stressed themes such as sovereignty, responsibility, resilience, and national ownership of security challenges. His supporters view these ideas as a call for African countries to develop their own solutions to African problems. When Mali launches operations against militant networks, and Traore simultaneously appears among soldiers on a forward route, many observers see more than a coincidence. They see two expressions of the same strategic vision. One represents military action, the other represents political and symbolic leadership. For supporters of AES, the message is clear. Security is not only about weapons and operations, it is also about confidence, unity, and the belief that governments are willing to stand with the people they serve. At the same time, this vision carries significant responsibilities. Greater self-reliance also means greater accountability for results. Citizens ultimately judge leadership not by speeches or symbols alone, but by improvements in safety, stability, economic opportunity, and daily life. That is why the story unfolding across the Sahel is about more than military campaigns. It is about whether a new model of regional cooperation can translate determination and ambition into lasting security for future generations. The growing influence of the Alliance of Sahel States has not gone unnoticed outside the region. As Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger pursue a more independent security strategy, reactions from Western governments, policy institutions, and international observers have become increasingly mixed. Critics often point to concerns surrounding democratic governance, political transitions, freedom of expression, and human rights. Some argue that military-led governments should prioritize a rapid return to civilian rule. Others question whether concentrating power within security-focused administrations can deliver long-term political stability. These concerns continue to shape much of the international debate surrounding the leadership of Ibrahim Traore and the broader direction of AES. However, there is another side to the discussion that cannot be ignored. Many citizens across the Sahel judge policies not only by political theory, but by practical outcomes. For communities that have lived through years of insecurity, displacement, attacks on villages, and disruption of economic life, security often becomes the most immediate concern. In these areas, people frequently ask a simple question: which approach provides greater protection for ordinary families? This explains why support for leaders such as Ibrahim Traore remains strong among many segments of the population. Supporters argue that previous security frameworks, despite receiving substantial international backing, struggled to prevent the expansion of armed groups across large portions of the region. As a result, many citizens became receptive to alternative approaches centered on national sovereignty and regional self-reliance. The reality is likely more complex than either side admits. Effective security requires strong institutions, accountability, economic development, and public trust. Military success alone cannot solve every challenge. At the same time, political reforms become difficult to sustain when communities remain under constant threat. Ultimately, the true measure of success will not be determined by international headlines or political narratives. It will be determined by whether citizens experience safer communities, stronger economies, functioning public services, and greater confidence in the future. That is the standard by which every strategy, whether supported by Western partners or promoted by AES, will eventually be judged. As military operations continue across Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni, one question remains at the center of the conversation. What will ultimately determine victory in the Sahel? The answer extends far beyond the battlefield. Recent operations suggest that Mali is attempting to place sustained pressure on the networks that support armed groups. At the same time, the image of Captain Ibrahim Traore, traveling alongside soldiers, has reinforced a message that leadership, sacrifice, and national determination remain central themes in the region's struggle for stability. Yet, history teaches an important lesson. Military gains must be followed by consolidation. Roads must remain open. Communities must feel protected. Businesses must recover. Schools must function. Families must believe that peace is becoming more than a temporary pause between conflicts. This is where the future of the Sahel will be decided. For many supporters, Captain Ibrahim Traore has become a symbol of a broader Pan-African vision. His message resonates with those who believe that Burkina Faso and its neighbors should take greater responsibility for their own security and development. Whether one agrees with every aspect of that vision or not, its influence across the region is undeniable. As the alliance of Sahel states continues to evolve, discussions surrounding Pan-Africanism, sovereignty, security, and regional cooperation will remain at the center of Africa New conversations. The role of Captain Ibrahim Traore, the future of Ibrahim Traore's leadership, the relationship with the African Union, and the aspirations of a new generation will continue to shape the debate. The struggle continues, but so does the hope for a safer and more stable future. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for more in-depth coverage of Burkina Faso, Mali, and the changing future of the Sahel. A devastating JNIM assault on 2 military bases in northern Benin has sent shockwaves across West Africa and reignited a debate that many leaders had hoped to avoid. Despite years of international security cooperation, military training programs, intelligence partnerships, and foreign assistance. Heavily armed militants were still able to launch a coordinated attack that inflicted significant damage and raised serious questions about the effectiveness of existing security strategies. For many observers, this was not simply another terrorist incident. It was a warning signal. It was a reminder that the security crisis that once seemed concentrated in the Sahel is steadily moving southward, threatening countries that previously believed they were protected by geography, diplomacy, or international partnerships. Today, we examine why this attack has become much more than a military event. We will explore how the rise of the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES, has reshaped regional thinking about security, why the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore continues to attract attention across Africa, and whether Benin may eventually need closer cooperation with its northern neighbors to confront a growing threat. If you value in-depth African geopolitical analysis grounded in facts, history, and real developments on the ground, make sure you subscribe and join our growing community. The attack itself immediately captured regional attention because of its scale and organization. Reports indicated that hundreds of militants associated with JNIM participated in operations targeting military positions in northern Benin. The attackers reportedly conducted surveillance, coordinated their movements, and launched a highly organized assault that overwhelmed local defenses. The significance of the attack extends beyond the immediate casualties and material losses. For years, security analysts warned that extremist groups operating in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger would eventually seek to expand toward coastal West African nations. What many feared is now becoming reality. Benin has increasingly found itself on the front line of a conflict that was once viewed as a distant problem. The country's northern regions share strategic connections with areas that have experienced prolonged instability, making them vulnerable to infiltration and cross-border attacks. Perhaps the most important consequence of this incident is the conversation it has sparked. Across West Africa, policymakers, military officers, and ordinary citizens are asking difficult questions. If heavily supported security systems can still be breached, what adjustments are necessary? If terrorism continues to spread despite years of international involvement, should countries begin exploring alternative approaches? These questions have placed the experiences of Burkina Faso, Mali, and the broader AES Alliance under renewed scrutiny. Whether one agrees with their policies or not, their efforts have become impossible to ignore, and the attack on Benin has only intensified that discussion. The expansion of terrorism across West Africa did not happen overnight. It is the result of years of shifting battlefields, evolving militant strategies, and changing regional dynamics. What is happening in Benin today mirrors a pattern that security experts have been warning about for a long time. For years, JNIM concentrated much of its activity in Mali, Burkina Faso, and parts of Niger. These areas became the center of the regional counterterrorism struggle. However, as military pressure increased in certain zones, extremist groups began looking for new opportunities beyond their traditional strongholds. This is one reason many analysts believe terrorism is gradually moving south. Militants understand that borders in West Africa are often difficult to secure. They exploit remote terrain, isolated communities, and gaps in regional coordination. As a result, countries that were once considered relatively insulated from the worst violence are now facing growing risks. Benin has become one of the clearest examples of this shift. Its northern territories sit near regions that have experienced years of instability. What once seemed like a distant security challenge has increasingly become a domestic concern. The recent attack demonstrated that the threat is no longer approaching. It has already arrived. The implications extend beyond Benin. Neighboring countries such as Togo and Ghana are also paying close attention to these developments. If extremist groups continue expanding toward coastal West Africa, the entire security landscape of the region could change dramatically. This reality has strengthened calls for deeper regional cooperation. Terrorist organizations do not respect national borders. They move where opportunities exist. Therefore, many observers argue that security responses must become just as flexible and coordinated. The attack on Benin serves as a powerful reminder that no country can afford to view itself in isolation. The future stability of West Africa may depend on how effectively nations work together against a threat that increasingly affects them all. The creation of the Alliance of Sahel States marked one of the most significant geopolitical developments in modern West African history. Formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the alliance emerged during a period when all three countries faced severe security threats and growing frustration with existing regional arrangements. At its core, the AES was designed around a simple idea. An attack against one member should be viewed as a challenge to all members. Rather than addressing terrorism as separate national problems, the alliance seeks to approach security as a shared regional responsibility. This philosophy represents an important departure from older models. For many years, security cooperation often depended heavily on external partnerships, international missions, and outside support. While those efforts achieved some successes, many communities across the Sahel continued to experience violence, displacement, and instability. The AES leadership argues that countries facing the same threat should coordinate more directly with one another. This includes improving intelligence sharing, increasing military communication, and strengthening the ability to respond rapidly to cross-border movements by armed groups. One of the most important aspects of the AES model is its emphasis on regional ownership. Leaders within the alliance frequently stress that security decisions should be guided primarily by local realities rather than distant priorities. Supporters believe this approach allows governments to react more quickly and design strategies that better reflect conditions on the ground. The recent attack in Benin has renewed interest in this model. As extremist groups continue to operate across national borders, many observers are asking whether stronger cooperation between countries facing similar threats could improve overall security outcomes. The AES does not claim to have solved every challenge confronting the Sahel. Terrorism remains a serious concern throughout the region. However, the alliance has introduced a framework that many Africans view as an attempt to build security capacity from within, rather than relying exclusively on external actors. That idea continues to attract attention as countries search for effective ways to protect their people and defend their sovereignty. To understand why Ibrahim Traore has become one of the most discussed leaders in Africa, it is necessary to look beyond military operations and focus on the broader philosophy that guides his leadership. For Traore, security is not simply about defeating armed groups. It is about rebuilding a nation in a way that reduces the conditions that allow instability to grow in the first place. Since coming to power, he has repeatedly emphasized that military victories alone cannot guarantee long-term peace. A country must also strengthen its economy, expand opportunities for its citizens, and reduce dependence on external actors. This perspective has become a central theme in Burkina Faso's national conversation and a major reason why his influence extends far beyond his country's borders. Supporters argue that Traore represents a new generation of African leadership focused on sovereignty, self-reliance, and national dignity. His speeches often connect security, economic development, and political independence as parts of the same challenge. According to this view, a nation that cannot feed itself, develop its industries, or control its resources will always face vulnerabilities regardless of how strong its military may become. This philosophy has resonated with many people across West Africa. In countries such as Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Senegal, growing numbers of citizens follow developments in Burkina Faso with interest. Some see Traore as a symbol of African self-determination. Others remain cautious but acknowledge that his message has sparked important discussions about the future direction of the continent. The recent attack in Benin has added new relevance to these debates. As governments search for effective responses to expanding security threats, many observers are examining not only military strategies but also the broader ideas that shape them. In that context, Traore's emphasis on linking security with development continues to attract attention. Whether one agrees with all of his policies or not, his impact on regional political discourse is undeniable, and it's ADD. He has helped shift the conversation from dependence toward self-reliance and from reaction toward long-term national resilience. That influence may continue to grow as West Africa confronts increasingly complex security challenges. While the recent attack in Benin has drawn international attention, many observers have also focused on developments inside Burkina Faso and Mali. These two countries remain at the center of the regional struggle against extremist groups, and their experiences provide important context for understanding the broader security debate. In Burkina Faso, the government has pursued a strategy that combines military operations with efforts to strengthen national self-reliance. Security remains a major challenge, and no serious observer would claim that all problems have been solved. However, supporters of the current approach point to several developments that they believe demonstrate progress. Military authorities have expanded local defense initiatives, increased recruitment efforts, and sought to improve coordination between national forces and communities. At the same time, the government has promoted programs designed to increase domestic production, strengthen agriculture, and encourage greater economic independence. The underlying idea is that security and development must advance together. Mali presents a similar picture of determination mixed with ongoing challenges. The Malian armed forces, commonly known as FAMA, continue to play a central role in operations against JNM and other armed groups. Military pressure has remained intense across multiple regions, particularly in areas that have long served as centers of insurgent activity. Supporters of the AES approach argue that sustained military pressure has made it more difficult for extremist groups to operate freely in some locations. Critics counter that significant threats remain and that stability has not yet been fully restored. Both observations can be true at the same time. What makes the experiences of Burkina Faso and Mali particularly relevant for Benin is not the claim of perfect success. Rather, it is the willingness of these countries to experiment with a model that links security cooperation, national sovereignty, and economic self-reliance. As Benin evaluates its own future strategy, the lessons emerging from its northern neighbors may become increasingly difficult to ignore. The rise of the alliance of Sahel states has not been welcomed by everyone. Across Europe, North America, and within certain international institutions, concerns have been raised about the direction taken by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Critics frequently point to issues involving governance, political transitions, press freedom, and human rights. Others argue that the withdrawal of AES members from ECOWAS risks creating new divisions within West Africa. These concerns are part of an important debate and should not be dismissed outright. Every government, regardless of its political system, should remain accountable to its citizens and strive to protect fundamental rights. However, supporters of the AES model present a different perspective. They argue that many of the security problems facing the Sahel developed during years when foreign military partnerships were already deeply involved in the region. From this viewpoint, it is reasonable for African nations to explore alternative strategies when previous approaches failed to deliver lasting stability. Supporters also emphasize that ordinary citizens often judge policies by practical outcomes rather than political theories alone. They ask whether communities are becoming safer, whether economic opportunities are improving, and whether governments are strengthening their ability to protect national sovereignty. The debate surrounding AES ultimately reflects a larger question facing Africa. Should security strategies continue to depend primarily on external frameworks? Or should African nations assume greater responsibility for designing solutions tailored to local realities? As events in Benin demonstrate, this discussion is no longer theoretical. It is increasingly tied to urgent questions of security, stability, and the future direction of the continent. The attack on Benin has created a moment of reflection not only for one country, but for the entire African continent. The central question is no longer whether the security threat is expanding. The evidence suggests that it is. The more important question is how nations choose to respond. Benin now stands at a strategic crossroads. It can continue relying primarily on existing security frameworks, strengthen bilateral partnerships, or deepen practical cooperation with neighboring countries that confront the same threats every day. Whatever path is chosen, the recent attack has demonstrated that security challenges can no longer be viewed through a purely national lens. The broader lesson for Africa is equally important. Long-term stability requires more than military strength alone. It requires regional cooperation, economic resilience, accountable leadership, and the ability to address the root causes of instability. These principles are increasingly shaping discussions across the continent. As Africa continues to evolve, the ideas of Pan-African cooperation, Burkina Faso, Africa New, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and Ibrahim Traore will remain at the center of important conversations shaping the continent's future. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay with us for more in-depth coverage of the developments transforming Africa today. Burkina Faso is shocking Africa and even the Western world in ways very few people expected just a few years ago. Thousands of men who once slept under trees, fled burning villages, and lost everything to terrorism are now standing in military uniform as officially trained soldiers of the National Armed Forces. And many observers across the Sahel are now asking the same question. Is Burkina Faso simply defending itself? Or is a completely new military power beginning to rise inside the AES Alliance? Because what is happening today in Burkina Faso is no longer just about volunteers carrying old rifles in forgotten villages. This is now a national transformation, a military transformation, a psychological transformation, and perhaps even the beginning of a new African security model. Some of these young men once had no homes. Some could not return to their farms because terrorists had taken over entire areas. Some did not even know where their next meal would come from. Yet they still stepped forward and said they were ready to defend their country for free. Today, many of them are no longer just volunteers. They are trained soldiers. Under Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso is expanding its military structure at a speed that is starting to alarm neighboring countries and Western analysts alike. The government is training thousands, reorganizing territorial defense, and building what supporters call a people's army. But supporters inside Burkina Faso see something completely different from what foreign critics describe. They see a nation refusing to collapse. And in this video today, we are going to look deeper into how Burkina Faso transformed thousands of displaced civilians into soldiers, why the AES Alliance is becoming stronger, and why the entire Sahel may never look the same again. And if you believe Africa's future deserves to be understood beyond Western headlines, make sure you subscribe and continue this journey with us. Not long ago, Many of these men were not soldiers. They were farmers, fathers, young villagers, ordinary people trying to survive in parts of Burkina Faso that had become battlegrounds. Some came from villages attacked in the middle of the night. Others fled after terrorists burned homes, destroyed food supplies. Killed local leaders. Entire farming communities disappeared almost overnight. Families that had lived on the same land for generations suddenly found themselves sleeping outside with nowhere safe to go. And yet, out of this suffering, something unexpected happened. Thousands of civilians began volunteering to defend their communities, not for wealth, not for status, but because they believed there was no one else left to protect their homeland. Many of them joined the VDP, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland. At first, these groups were lightly equipped local defense units. Some had very little training, some had old weapons. Many had almost nothing except determination. But what shocked many people inside Burkina Faso was the spirit these volunteers showed. There were reports of young men gathering in open fields by the thousands, handing over their names and documents, asking to be recruited even without guaranteed salaries. Some openly said they had already lost their farms and could no longer return home safely anyway. In their minds, sitting and waiting meant watching the country disappear piece by piece. For many older Africans watching this situation, the images felt deeply emotional. Men who once cultivated the land were now preparing to defend it with rifles in their hands. Men who once worried about harvest seasons were now talking about protecting villages and escorting displaced families back home. And perhaps that is why the VDP story has become so powerful inside Burkina Faso, because to many citizens, these volunteers are not simply fighters, they are symbols of sacrifice, symbols of survival, symbols of a people refusing to surrender their country, even after losing almost everything. What Burkina Faso is doing today is very different from the early days of the VDP movement. In the beginning, many volunteers were only expected to support local security efforts. They knew the villages, they knew the roads, they knew the forests and dry terrain better than outside forces, but they were not considered a true national military force. That is now changing very quickly. Under the current military leadership, thousands of VDP members are being transformed into officially trained soldiers through organized military programs across the country. Young recruits now undergo months of physical conditioning, weapons training, combat exercises, territorial defense instruction, and military discipline. They are learning how to disassemble and operate weapons. They are learning patrol tactics, ambush response, communication procedures, and civilian protection. They are also being trained mentally to operate under pressure in one of the most dangerous security environments in Africa today. And perhaps the most symbolic moment comes when these former volunteers officially receive military insignia and wear the national uniform for the first time. For many families in Burkina Faso, that moment represents something much deeper than employment. It represents dignity, recognition, belonging. It tells displaced young men that they are no longer forgotten victims of war. They are now defenders of the nation. Military commanders inside Burkina Faso have repeatedly explained why this expansion is necessary. Winning territory from terrorists is only one part of the battle. Holding territory is much harder. Villages must be protected after liberation. Roads must stay secure. Displaced civilians must feel safe enough to return home. And this is exactly where the new generation of trained VDP soldiers becomes strategically important. Because these men already understand the local communities they are defending, they know the languages, they know the geography, and, unlike foreign forces, they are fighting for the survival of their own homeland. That is why many analysts now believe Burkina Faso is not simply expanding security forces. It is restructuring the entire idea of national defense inside the country. At the center of this transformation stands one man whose name now carries enormous influence across the Sahel region, Captain Ibrahim Traore. To his supporters, Traore is not simply a military leader. He represents a new generation of African leadership that believes the continent must rely more on its own strength, instead of waiting for outside powers to solve African problems. Salih! And nowhere is that vision more visible than in the way Burkina Faso is reorganizing its national defense. Traore appears to believe that terrorism cannot be defeated by a small professional army alone. In his view, the entire nation must become part of the defense structure. Villages, youth, former farmers, displaced civilians, everyone has a role in protecting the country. That philosophy is exactly why the VDP movement expanded so rapidly under his leadership. Instead of treating volunteers as temporary local fighters, the government began integrating many of them into a larger national military system. Training camps expanded, recruitment increased. Public ceremonies honoring new soldiers became symbols of patriotism across Burkina Faso. For many young people, Ibrahim Traore has become a symbol of dignity and resistance. He speaks openly about sovereignty, self-reliance, sacrifice, and national pride. Supporters see him as a leader trying to rebuild confidence inside a country wounded by years of violence and instability. But perhaps the most important thing Traore has done is psychological. He has convinced many ordinary citizens that they are not powerless. That matters deeply in a country where so many people once felt abandoned by both international partners and failing security systems. Today, many Burkinabe citizens believe they are participating in something larger than military recruitment. They believe they are helping rebuild the soul of their nation. And across parts of Africa, especially among Pan-African supporters, that message is spreading very quickly. What is happening in Burkina Faso is no longer isolated to one country alone. It is now connected to a much larger regional shift happening across the Sahel. At the center of that shift is the AES Alliance, the partnership between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These three nations have increasingly moved closer together after years of frustration with insecurity, foreign military influence, and political pressure from outside powers. Today, they are building something many observers never expected to see in West Africa, a coordinated regional security bloc built around military cooperation and self-reliance. And Burkina Faso is becoming one of the most aggressive drivers of that transformation. The country is rapidly expanding recruitment, strengthening territorial defense, and an increasing cooperation with neighboring AES partners. Intelligence sharing between border regions has improved. Joint military coordination is becoming more common. And the message coming from these governments is very clear. The Sahel must defend itself. For supporters of AES, this alliance represents more than military strategy. It represents political independence. It represents the idea that African countries should control their own security decisions without depending entirely on foreign military structures. But the rapid rise of AES is also creating concern in parts of the international community. Some neighboring governments worry that the alliance could reshape regional power balances. Others fear that growing military coordination may deepen political divisions inside West Africa. Still, inside Burkina Faso, many citizens see the alliance very differently. They see countries that have suffered similar pain finally standing together. And with thousands of newly trained soldiers now entering Burkina Faso's military structure, many analysts believe AES is no longer just a political alliance. It is slowly becoming a new military force in the Sahel that the world can no longer ignore. As Burkina Faso expands its military structure, criticism from parts of the Western world has also become louder. Some international observers argue that the country is becoming too militarized too quickly. Human rights organizations have raised concerns about the rapid expansion of armed civilian forces and the risks that can appear when large numbers of recruits are mobilized during an ongoing conflict. There are fears about discipline, command structures, and the possibility of abuses in remote areas where security operations are difficult to monitor. Western analysts also worry that the growing military cooperation between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger could increase political tensions across West Africa. And behind many of these concerns is another reality. The influence of traditional Western powers inside the Sahel is clearly weakening. For decades, countries like France played major military roles in the region, but many citizens across Burkina Faso began losing confidence after years